Good afternoon and welcome to this conversation at the World Economic Forum. For those of you who are following us on social media, use the hashtag WEF20 to follow the conversations and to join in. This afternoon, we are discussing the Indian Ocean Rim, and we are trying to assess a strategic outlook for the region. This region sees two-thirds of the world's oil shipments pass through its waters and is home to half of the world's container ships that support 2.7 billion people. What are the strategic priorities for the Indian Ocean Rim in 2020? Now, of course, we are going to base these conversations in the backdrop of three C's: climate change, regional cooperation, and the third, of course, is the rise of China and how it is implicating the trade and infrastructure arrangements in the region. To have this conversation, we have a very eminent panel. We are going to be joined by Joki Jehu, the director of Daughters of Mumbai Global Resource Center, Kenya, and she is going to make sure that everything else that we discuss today is going to be a community-first conversation. To her left is Minister Piyush Goyal, who is in charge of responding to the rough headwinds the Indian economy is currently experiencing and to ensure that a sensible futuristic framework is established for the region. To my immediate right is Matthias Cormann, Minister of Finance and Leader of the Government in the Senate of Australia, and we are certainly going to quiz him on climate change and the Australian response. And finally, to his right is Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem, Group Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, DP World, a business leader who is going to add some realpolitik into a conversation. So let me start with Minister Goyal. Minister Goyal, sir, a failed attempt to seal the RCEP, general impression that India is hesitant to enter into these big, ambitious arrangements, economic headwinds that we are responding to. How does India put together a new proposition in 2020? What are the toolkits available to India?
Well, I think at the outset, RCEP in its present form that we were discussing and engaged in clearly was an unworkable agreement. Agreement has to factor in, any regional cooperation agreement, trade agreement has to factor in several diversities amongst partners. You have different levels of prosperity, different geographies, different political firmament in which the country works. And in that grouping over there, most countries have regional cooperation or FTAs amongst themselves, except India and China. India is already grappling with huge trade deficits, particularly with China, amongst other South Asian economies. And we believe many of those terms of trade are not fair, are not equitable, and are also not very transparent. In that situation, unless there were credible assurances and very robust framework available in the RCEP discussions, it was very difficult for India to commit ourselves to that kind of a regional comprehensive economic partnership. I think for the first time, India has demonstrated that trade will not be dictated by diplomacy. Trade has to stand on its own legs. Trade has to be fair. And diplomacy will take care of itself through diplomatic channels. Coming to the Indian Ocean, I think we have a very important role overall in the region. We are at the crown of the Indian Ocean region, literally like a pivot, and one of the largest economies in that region. We care for countries along the Indian Ocean. We believe that region has a huge potential to contribute to economic growth, but we also have serious concerns about climate change impacting many of those countries. And India has a massive outreach program to support the countries along the Indian Ocean region. We have a significant effort amongst our Far East, Look East and Act East policies to support many of these smaller countries, particularly the island nations. And I believe that going forward, this entire grouping along the Indian Ocean and several groupings revolving around that region are going to play a very important role, both in economic growth, greater deal of cooperation, but on fair terms, equitable terms, keeping in mind the different economies that we are working with, And we're also going to be engaging with each other much more on climate change.
How does the ongoing, sometimes hot, sometimes cold, trade conversations between US and China implicate countries such as India in the region?
Well, I think China and America had similar issues that India and China have. So to that extent, we had the same question posed to me in the Raisina dialogues in New Delhi recently. And I believe all that President Trump has done is bring to fore a concern which was facing America for a very long time. American manufacturing was badly affected. And to my mind, if America is trying to bring back some more balance in their economic relations and trade with China, it's something that all of us countries will have to reflect on. We in India also are working with different countries to see how we can bring back more equitable balance in trade terms with different regions. And that would also possibly be one of the causes why RCEP was not possible for us to join, because it was not going to help us bridge any of that trade balance. It would only have
Aggravated it. Let me turn to Madam Jehu. We are seeing multiple efforts in the region. You have a Chinese Belt and Road Initiative that is really giving Africa lots of infrastructure choices. You are seeing a renewed attempt by the Japanese, the Americans, the Australians, even the Indians in their economic diplomacy projects provide certain investments and certain support to projects in Africa. Are these projects part of a larger strategic and geopolitical thrust, or do you believe these are projects that are helping communities eventually? Since you represent a very important segment of the world, women, are these projects gendered in their design, or are we seeing a distance between the politics and people?
Well, I think that you're right that there's a lot of proxy maneuvering that happens, especially on the African continent. And the Indian Ocean Rim, especially around the Horn of Africa, is no different. And the concern that communities have, the concern that activists have, the concern that I have is that in all of this, communities, coastal communities, fisherfolk, people who are actually living in the region, who do not have as big a voice or as actually as governments, get left out. There's a lot of talk about leaving no one behind, and it is said about communities, it's said about countries, it's said about different classes of identity, whether it's women or youth. But the truth of the matter, I think, is that it is clear part of what is happening with people being left behind is that they're being pushed behind by policies that do not take them into account. So climate, trade, sort of relationships in this Indian Ocean Rim, it is true that there is almost a new realm that is unfolding in the 21st century, but it is a very old realm, goes back to Vasco da Gama, if I remember my history lessons. But when those kinds of things unfold, we find that some things are given priority, and the concern for climate, the concern for communities, the concern for ocean life, the concern for biodiversity remains and must be prioritized, along with other things that need to be prioritized, including security. We have new actors in the Indian Ocean realm, whether you're talking about the Chinese influence or the US or Turkish, or you're talking about Somali pirates. And all of those have implications on what happens to ordinary people who are not necessarily in the conversations that are happening now. They will probably come later. And this is why we think that it is people and communities being pushed behind.
Do you believe you have, using the tools of technology and mass mobilization, more agency today than you had before in terms of these conversations?
Of course. Activists and communities have become very adept, and the organizations in many communities have become very adept in terms of articulating their issues, their concerns, raising the alarm when they need to do that, and and the solidarity that we enjoy as activists. I'm from Daughters of Mombi Global Resource Center, but we are part of the Fight Inequality Alliance, which is active in many countries. This week alone, in 30 countries, people are raising questions about inequality and proposing from the streets what the solutions are and what are the concerns that they have. So there is a lot of agency. There is technology that is helping us speak. Even as on this panel, we are being broadcast all over. So those things are there, and they are helpful in terms of making sure that early on in those conversations that are happening between India and China, or happening between the US and whoever, that the concerns of workers, of climate, the concerns of women and communities are raised and heard.
Thank you, ma'am. Let me turn to Minister from Australia, Mr. Common. First of all, our thoughts go out to the people in Australia who are fighting this terrible natural disaster. But in some sense, you cannot now escape but discuss the important issue of climate change. And I know that the Australian government has a current position and line on it. But all over the world, we are seeing future growth and development is going to be tempered by the key questions that global warming is posing to all of us. Now, how does an Australian government respond to this? A resource-intensive Australian government respond to this key question of climate change?
Well, we have been discussing the issue of climate change in Australia, of course, for a very long time. And the Australian government has a very strong policy position when it comes to addressing climate change. We are committed to effective action on climate change. Australia is one of only a handful of countries that will not just meet but beat its emissions reduction targets agreed to in Kyoto for 2020 by more than 400 million tons of CO2. We are on track and have the plans and the policies in place to meet and indeed beat our emissions reduction targets agreed to in Paris. And if you look at those targets, so the headline figure 26 to 28%, but on a per capita basis, we're a large continent with a small population. On a per capita basis, we are on track to reduce emissions by half, which is more ambitious than across the European Union on a per capita basis, more ambitious than Canada, New Zealand, and a whole range of other countries. And indeed, if you look at the emissions intensity of our economy, the level of emissions per unit of GDP, we are on track to reduce emissions by 2/3. So this proposition that is circulated by some that somehow in Australia we're not committed to effective action on climate change is false. It is a narrative that suits certain commentators, suits the purposes of certain commentators, but it's not accurate. I also would just like to talk about, I guess, the whole question of Indian Ocean rim countries and what else we can do and what else we can do better. There's a clear strategic import of the Indian Ocean rim for Australia. 5 of our top 15 trading partners are in the Indian Ocean rim. 90% of our exports are transported by ship, half of which go through the Indian Ocean. And there's lots of opportunity. 30% of the people in the world live across Indian Ocean rim countries, yet we're only responsible for about 11% of global trade, and only 3% of global trade is business between ourselves, between each other. And there clearly is so much opportunity for us to do more business with each other and to help lift living standards in our respective countries. And yes, of course, Australia will continue to address climate change as we have been, and we will continue to engage internationally in relation to these issues. But we're also very keen to maintain the focus on what else we can do in further integrating our economies and generating more trade opportunities.
At the very end, I would like to go to all of you to ask you for one advice on how to strengthen this regional deficit of trade and economic integration. But let me ask you another question, Mr. Minister. Australia, one of the key elements of future cooperation is going to be around the digital age. And Australia has been an early comer in terms of taking a position on what are the technologies they are not going to allow and what are the technologies they are going to engage with. Do you believe that this is going to implicate Australia's ability to grow a certain kind of trading industry because it is taking technology choices at this stage?
Well, we obviously don't believe so. We've made, governments always have to make judgments on how best to advance the national interests, and from time to time there are competing issues that governments have got to deal with, specifically when it comes to balancing trade opportunities with national security considerations and protecting your sovereignty and so on. And I mean, these are judgments that we've made in the past. We don't make them gratuitously. We're an open trading economy. We're very focused on having the best possible relations with countries all around the world, in particular in our region. But when it comes to digital technology and the digital economy of the future, lots of opportunities, but also lots of risks, and all of that has to be very carefully considered and carefully managed.
And finally, sir, there is this new recent proposition emerging from Tokyo, Canberra, and DC, infrastructure proposition for the region. How different and how compelling is it going to be vis-a-vis the Belt and Road, which has already seen so many large projects being unfolded?
Well, it's not that recent an initiative. I mean, obviously, between Japan, the US, and Australia in a tripartite fashion. I mean, we have pursued infrastructure investment and development across the region, for a very long time, and we've made various announcements in recent years. I mean, in the end, there's a significant infrastructure investment gap. I think that there is a need for all countries around the world that can help fill that infrastructure gap, and that is obviously the tripartite commitment between the US, Japan, and Australia is one part of that puzzle.
Mr. Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem, let me turn to you, sir. A very successful company, very successful country, and a region that's always aflame. How do you manage these two contradictions, being in Dubai, being in West Asia, trying to navigate the turbulent times? How do we respond to the crises? How do we create a regional arrangement to manage this?
Well, we're not just in Dubai. We are in 49 countries, 83 terminals. The Indian Ocean Rim is a very important region because most of the world trade between East and West go through it. These geopolitical issues are something that people get excited when it happens, but it dies away. We have seen many, many issues like that. I want to, I think, comment on one thing, and I totally agree with Goyal on the fair trade. Today, we need to see ease of countries exchanging cargoes. And I will look at India, for example. Even though today the GATT ensures that people are operating in a way that it's fair, the trade is not fair, and we know it. But if you look at two countries, India and China, both have the same population. India's trade is 100 million. China trade is 100 million. India is like 13 million. So we have invested a lot. That's how we react to the demand in India, because we believe there are going to be a lot of growth prospect in India. What of course slows growth in India is infrastructure and regulatory regimes. But we are very encouraged that the current political disposition have taken really great courage in doing away with many legacy issues. And when I talk to Payush, and you see the vision they have, they want to adapt technologies of tomorrow today. One of the things we're trying to promote is, for example, Hyperloop, which is a future transportation method, and India became receptive to that technology. India's growth will happen faster when we do away with regulation and when we have infrastructure development, which is today, it's a priority for the Indian government. Now, in our business, we look for cargo. How do you increase cargo? There is a formula in our business. 1% of GDP growth will bring 3% in cargo. So in whatever we do, we always go in projects that will encourage more employment and more GDP growth. And you look at Africa. Kenya, for example. You get a container from China to Mombasa. $800 is the freight. From Mombasa to Kigali is $5,000. So you get almost 200 million landlocked population of Africa, where the infrastructure is a big, big issue for them. It's not a matter of how much it costs. is whether available or not. And so we opened in Rwanda a logistic park. And we thought it will be enough, the space. It is beyond what we expected. It used to take 2 weeks from Mombasa or Dar es Salaam to Kigali in Rwanda. Now it's 48 hours through Tanzania. So we are interested to invest in infrastructure. We invested in the last 2 years over $2 billion in infrastructure investment in India alone, in double-stack rails, in cold stores, and in rails and in logistic parks. Because our work today as port, not traditionally, we used to work inside the port, and once the cargo leaves the gate, it's not our problem. It's our problem to be out of the gate. And so these are the things that we do ourselves.
Let me ask you, sir, that we are also seeing this whole new orientation emerge in Dubai, certainly, in UAE more broadly, on now investing in the fourth industrial revolution. Technologies, 3D printing, AI, etc. How is that going to change the typical old infrastructure businesses?
Well, the way trade and industry is developing is so fast. And if you tell me what is the single item that I feel always that's a risk in our business, is technology disruption. Now, the Far East, not the Indian Ocean Rim, has been the main area to manufacture. Anything you see in the world comes from either Japan, Korea, Taiwan, or China. Today, we are in China for the last 3 years, for the last 11 years. And the cost of employment is increasing every year 20% for us. It's not any more cheaper there. That's a challenge for those countries. In addition, you mentioned 3D printing, nanotechnology. The telephone that you use today is not made by humans. So today, you look at Sony, they say we don't make television, we make a machine that makes television. That means when China talks about Belt and Road, they're talking about how they can get closer to the consumers. And so basically, there is a big chance that many of these manufacturers doesn't need to be in those countries. People today demand to see products available faster. So this gives, in my opinion, opportunities. And so the technology is going to increase the opportunities for the Indian Ocean. People talk about automation and they think it's going to take jobs. It's not. It's actually going to give people better jobs. Today is the age of the brain. The wealth of any country today is what is new ideas they can get and deploy. And we look at Apple. Apple is an idea. It's richer than any country. And so today, these ideas are coming and giving people better jobs. We have a port. Sometimes they call it the ghost port because there's no people in it. And people say, what do people do? People are smart. In the old time, if you work in a port, if you are strong, you make more money. Today, if you have ideas, you make more money. So when they ask us, where are the people? It's all machines. The people are in the offices trying to reduce the inefficiency of the supply chain, trying to talk to someone who's importing something from a factory floor to the consumer door, cutting costs for him, creating innovating ideas of how to reduce the cost and how to remove the inefficiency. Because today, the supply chain is very inefficient. And that's where we need ideas.
Minister Goyal, I think I can bring you in now. You've heard all the speakers. I think 3 issues strike me from what has been mentioned. One, of course, is regulation and governance. I think that's a point from the chairman from Dubai. The second, of course, is energy and infrastructure linkages, say, between Australia and India and in the region. How do we build that up despite the narratives that are emerging which challenge such infrastructure creation from around the world? And the third, of course, is from Kenya. How is this people-centered? How does the common man, woman, child benefit from any of these endeavors? So let me turn to you, sir.
Well, at the outset, when it comes to governance or improving the regulatory framework, India over the years has had some very serious challenges. I think a lot of foreign investment was hesitant to come to India because of the concerns about how governments function, how licenses are issued, would we get an equal and fair opportunity? And I think over the last 5 years, you would appreciate there's not been one single scandal in the government of the day. And we are in fact grappling with a lot of issues which are legacy issues, inherited from the past. And a lot of that is causing concerns and causing the economy also to slow down. But we've made a conscious decision that we would like India to be recognized across the world as an honest nation. We want to come into the League of Nations where everybody is welcome to come and do honest and transparent business, and equal opportunity will be provided for all. You won't ever see our government give out licenses without a transparent process. You won't see our government now in India ever distinguish between one or the other investor. Everybody gets an equal opportunity to succeed, to contribute to India. During this process, there's bound to be some short-term pain. And that pain comes in that transition period. I believe the nation is ready to accept that short-term pain, because that's the only way in the long run we'll be able to really provide for our people a fair and equitable opportunity and provide for investors a good government, a good governance, a good regulatory practices. As far as infrastructure and energy security go, over the years, we've almost allowed energy to be imported, energy sources of energy to be imported, without significant effort to try and tap our own natural resources. That's been another area of focus. We are bidding out our coal mines for commercial operation. We are giving out our oil and gas reserves linked to market prices to try and attract more investment, make India more self-sufficient. At the same time, we are engaging with the rest of the world to see how infrastructure growth, both in India and in other regions, can be done in partnership. As Bin Suleiman ji just said, they've been doing a lot of good work in India to build up Indian infrastructure on the food chains, value chains associated with agriculture, with the port systems. We believe that's much more opportunity. We've just come out with a nearly $1.5 trillion opportunity in different infrastructure projects, which we are showcasing to the rest of the world to attract more investment. But one thing I would like to mention, India has never looked at infrastructure investments outbound being a tool for diplomacy. For us, our outbound initiatives, and a lot of them are in Africa, and I'd like to compliment her for the good work that her organization is doing, and for the point that she raised, that inequality in Africa cannot be addressed only by foreign capital coming in and trying to dominate local politics or local infrastructure. We've seen certain countries taking investments and infrastructure to, particularly to the less developed region, and trying to dominate the politics of that region. India strongly opposes that. We believe that support should be purely on humanitarian grounds. It should be agnostic to any other diplomatic outreach that we have. And we are looking to expand that. For example, the Prime Minister initiated the Sagar initiative a few years ago, where we talked about security and growth for all in the region. I'm talking of the Indian Ocean region. Now, our effort there was never to dominate any of these small islands. We respect them and treat them as equals, despite being such a large country. And our effort has throughout been to see how we can support, engage with them, and actually help them come out of the clutches of the dangers of climate change that the whole world is talking about. But very few are really doing significant effort to address
So,
those
how do you
challenges.
reconcile this contradiction? And I think for those who are here and for others who are watching you, and I struggle to explain that, but maybe you are far more erudite. How do you reconcile the ambition to invest in domestic coal mines and become the world's largest beneficiary of solar power at the same time?
Well, it's very logical and simple. In fact, India has contributed the least to global warming. Our role or our contribution to the problem up there is the lowest on a per capita basis, probably almost as low as the African continent. The Western world, which has actually brought in almost 50% of the carbon up there, is really not contributing all or meeting all their commitments on investment on technology that were made at various rounds culminating in the Paris Agreement. He's right, Australia is trying to improve on its INDCs. India is going to go much more than what we committed at Paris. But the reality is the Western world is, and we heard that today morning also, is not yet fully committed to addressing this challenge. Whereas we in India, look at our LED program. We are the world's largest consumers of LED bulbs. We probably have a base of 1.5 billion LED bulbs in India, largest ever. It has reduced our power consumption by about 40 billion units or 40 billion kilowatt hours, and effectively helped us reduce close to 120 to 140 million tons of carbon emissions. One single project. Now, as we take power to the entire country, to every home, we need to have 24/7 power. And our base load comes from coal. Every developing country, be it America when it was in the development stage, be it Australia, be it Europe, when they were in the development phase, have exploited coal, have used that low-cost energy to help build up their industrial base. And low-cost energy is a given if you want to really expand your economy. India today is at that stage where we are expanding our economy. We are looking for a better quality of life for our people. Coal provides that low-cost power as a base load in which we can inject renewable energy. We already have a 175 gigawatt renewable energy program until 2022. Now the Prime Minister has expanded that to a 450 gigawatt renewable energy plan by 2030. Where will I put in all that energy? I can't put it into a grid which doesn't have a base load.
Correct.
Any technical person will understand. You need to have power flowing in the lines in which you can inject the renewable power. Now, this large volume of renewable power needs a base load which comes from coal in India. That's our natural resource. That's what we have in abundance. We don't have oil. We don't have gas. We have not yet been accepted into the nuclear suppliers group because of the obstructionist tactics of one country. So we are not able to expand nuclear as fast as probably we would have liked to. So effectively, we are left with coal as the only source of baseload power. And if we don't take that, then we can't implement our renewable energy program.
Madam Jehu, you've heard a conversation on energy, climate. You've also heard about technology as the single most important disruptor or a national security and economic growth option. How do you see communities navigating these two spaces? Climate change, where you have certain realities that Minister alluded to, and technology, where you're increasingly going to be faced with binary options. Do you want US tech or China tech, or do you create your own tech? I think these are the options that we are all grappling with.
Well, I think that the concern of communities the world over, and I know that even in India, some years back, this was a problem where energy would be produced here to be exported to another part of the country. Right. So that, in fact, the people who bear the brunt of the emissions of the infrastructure where the power is being produced do not benefit the most from that power production. And I think that in this new decade, and actually in a lot of the things that are going on in our countries, the thing that we need to do is to learn from the mistakes of the past and to embrace new ideas and new innovations. So for energy, across the African continent, women bear the brunt of the burden of providing energy and meeting the energy needs of their communities. And I think that as investments are made to provide energy, to provide, whether it is for cooking or for lighting, that in the context of the climate crisis, there needs to be an eye to renewables. There needs to be an eye on technologies and methods that are not going to add to the climate crisis. So for women, for communities, for the areas that have been left behind. And sometimes they're left behind even when the extraction or the power is being produced in their localities. access becomes a really big issue. This question of women's unpaid care work, where women are walking many miles to get firewood, to get water, to meet the needs of their families, have to be integrated, whether it is through the SDGs or whether it is through the trade vision of a given country. And even in combating the climate crisis, they have to look at how everyone is brought along and none are left behind. And certainly for women, we have a huge stake, not just in Africa, but around the world, to make sure that the developments and the innovations that are happening include us, do not, in some ways, create worse conditions, in some ways do not include us in a way that is continuing to actually be detrimental to the well-being of women, to be detrimental to the well-being of communities.
Thank you. I'm going to probably pick up a few questions from all of you here. So those who want to pose a question to any of the panelists, please do so now. And I have my own question, so I will continue if you don't. But this is a chance to all of you to come in. Yeah, please.
So I have a question. Does India still have a chance of entering RCEP if conditions are changed? Is it open on the table yet?
Well, as we said on the day we decided not to join RCEP, that we are not able to join RCEP in its current form because we believe it does not really meet the original guiding principles of RCEP negotiations when they started some 10 years ago. I think we believe that if nations provide adequate protection against circumvention of product origin rules, if adequate transparency is brought into trading practices within different nations, if non-tariff barriers can be addressed, and we are facing a significant number of non-tariff barriers when we trade with many of the countries in the RCEP region, I think there is scope for discussion. And India is one country which always believes in discussion, dialogue, and moving forward. We never break the dialogue with anybody.
Mr. Bin Sulayem, you heard the minister speak about India not having options of gas. Do you think that is something that the West Asian region and India should now be looking for?
Absolutely. And I think in India, I've been to many, even remote parts, where the ability of many companies is really to clean the pollution. And I've seen companies where actually they use alternative energy. It is a big drive in India. And pollutants are converted to actually energy. Today, for example, in the shipping industry, I'm glad the IMO now enforcing the green fuel because that's a big pollution. And today, shipping companies are using, of course, the either scrubbers or using green. And I've seen a lot, actually, of projects in India where there is a lot of utilizing and recycling and getting energy from garbage, from many organic things. So that's big energy. And one thing I will comment, His Excellency, is when you talk about the LED bulbs, it's amazing. People think if you have to adapt sustainability, it costs money. Actually, it saves you money. In our port, we have done away with all the diesel in the equipment and we use electricity. We saved money. We changed all the bulbs to LED. And you know what? The cost of the change, we recovered it from 1 year of cost of energy. It's amazing. So people who don't do it, they think it's costly, but actually it saves money.
I'll just interject. We had a problem in India that LED bulbs were expensive, and the government used to subsidize it with $1.50. When we decided to expand the footprint of LED in the country, we decided that we'll try to bring down the cost of LED by at least 60 or 65%, make it affordable. And the first step we did was remove the subsidy. That was always a detriment to volume. We played the volume game. We ensured quality. And you won't believe it, we've invested only about $2.5 billion, not the government. Government has invested zero. The people of India have invested $2.5 billion to replace these 1.5 billion LED bulbs. Prices are down 85%.
Correct.
And the annual saving in electricity bulbs is upward of $6 billion every year. Yes. So you're literally at a payback of a few months when you engage with LED. Similarly, on Man's point on cooking fuel, India had about 130 million families which used cooking gas. And the rest were all on traditional chulas. Firewood and stuff like that. I'm happy to say that in 5 years, we've almost doubled that to now 250 million homes which have cooking gas. 80 million of them were given free of charge the connection. We give them on the LPG, we give them a subsidized price. But all those women are benefiting from the cooking gas available for cooking.
Mr. Minister, as we come to the last 5 minutes, if you were to find one solution for the region, would it be perhaps the creation of the Asian Union of of a variety where we actually have an Asian trading scheme, Asian energy grid, Asian visa-free zone? What are we really looking for to create an Indian Ocean rim that works?
Well, I mean, very, very respectfully and warmly, I don't think that with these things there is such a thing as a magic bullet and one solution. I mean, from an Australian point of view, we certainly believe in the power of doing more business with each other, in helping to create more opportunity for our people to get ahead, and to the extent that we can find through consensus approaches ways to integrate our economies more, do more business with each other, so that our exporting businesses can sell more goods and services, but our consumers can benefit from high quality, affordable products from all of our respective countries. Then I think that over time, I mean, I think looking back, that has proven to deliver substantial increases in living standards, and I think moving forward it has got a lot of potential to deliver increased living standards across our region. And as I say, only 3% of global trade is among the 30% of the population in the Indian Ocean Rim, so there's a lot of opportunity to do much better, and I'm sure that people of goodwill will be able to make that happen in the years and decades to come.
What would you do, sir?
I would say that if there is a way to implement the WTO whereby non-trade barriers are really exposed and removed. Because today everybody says it's tariff, it's not tariff. There are so many regulations that causes countries to lose a lot. And that is really, in my opinion, is what is the biggest obstacle and barrier over free trade between countries.
Ma'am, what is that single thing or a cluster of things we can do to try and become more integrated as a region that benefits people?
Well, I think one of the things would be to seriously fight inequality. Why, for the Fight Inequality Alliance, we've been talking about the need to tax wealth in order to both to tax wealth, but also to eliminate the conditions that allow some people to accumulate a lot of money, to accumulate a lot of wealth and power. Because for us, we believe that the system that allows for that to happen is a flawed system. It is a system that has failed to meet the needs of people on the planet. Especially with the billionaire class, it has been about their power, their influence on politics, on democracy. So truly fighting inequality would require a relook and a reformulation of our economic system to make sure that the planet, that communities, that people, women, the youth, people living with disabilities are part of the equation and not really being left behind, not being sacrificed at the altar of making profit.
So, final word to you.
Well, I think it's time the world looked at a reformed multilateral trading system. We've had the WTO for several years, but over the years, any system is bound to get its own challenges and concerns. We need to readdress issues about transparency, open trading, non-discriminatory trading practices, like you spoke about the non-tariff barriers. So we really need to see how we can have a more inclusive and fair trading platform across the world. Certainly addressing issues of inequality, different levels of prosperity of different regions, different countries, different populations. So if Australia is blessed with a lot of land and natural resources, but a very small population to support, they're able to look at trade with a different lens than a country like India or Africa, where we have large populations of underprivileged, less privileged, people who have to move up the value chain in terms of economic prosperity. Again, different politics. There are some democracies, some vibrant democracies, some republics, but not fully democratized. And then there are certain countries which do not have transparency in their politics. So all of these different issues have to be reconciled in a
For
new
a better trading system. We are out of time. I'm going to be closing this now. But more business, more infrastructure, more trade, and certainly people first. Lessons from this conversation with these four speakers. Please join me in applauding their interventions this afternoon.